the non-audio portion of this. So, hey guys, I'm Dr. Mcfarland, and in this video, we're going to be going over the Allen Heath GL2400, and this is a full overview with the channel strips, the main section, and also the inputs and outputs on the back, and how I would use this to record a full band. And that's pretty good. Okay, so this board is laid out in 24 channels. We have 16 on the left, with actually 2 of these faders, 15 and 16, being stereo, and we can actually bring in 2 stereo signals down this path. So I'll kind of go over what that would look like here in a little bit. And then on the main section, or the master section, the yellow faders are our outputs, and then the red faders are our groups, or they could be aux ins as well, depending on what you have connected in the back. Okay, you do have 8 more channels, completing the 24 channel signal path here on the right. And some people would use these maybe for effects returns, if you only need 16 channels, or if you're doing a full 24 channel band all at one time, then you just use the direct outs on the back of this. Okay, we're going to look at a channel strip a little bit closer, and let's see what we can learn from here. Alright, so that looks pretty good on the top. So right on the very top, the red knobs is our gain. Okay, we do have 60 dB of gain on the mic pre, and if you're using 48, or if you're using condenser microphones, then you need the 48 volt phantom power, which conveniently has a switch right here on the very top. The reason why I didn't go with the Soundcraft version of the same kind of layout is the 48 volt phantom power was actually on the back of the board, and it just didn't make sense to have a button that you couldn't really reach, especially if you're in the heat of the moment and you have to, all of a sudden put phantom power on a microphone. It just didn't make sense. So the Allen Heath definitely wins out as far as functionality and layout. There is a polarity switch as well, which I really like having that, especially when you're recording drums. And let's say, let me move this around a little bit. So let's say, for example, we have 1 and 2 is our kick in and our kick out. Okay, we're going to set that up. We're going to set the gain to where our LEDs over here in the master section is going to be hitting around like the 0 mark, maybe a little bit below. Now I do like having the green, the yellow, the red LED indicators, so you have a good idea of how loud your signal is coming in. Let me pull that up. You can see it a little bit more. There we go. That works. So here's the green LEDs, the yellow, the red, and the master. And you can press the PFL button for that, so that way, regardless of where the fader is, you're just going to be reading how loud that mic pre is coming in. Okay. Okay. So we have 48 volt phantom power, polarity, and we have a line / pad. Now this was another huge feature that I thought won out over the Soundcraft. And what happens is, if you don't have a line cable plugged into the actual line input on the back, and you just have regular XLR, then what's going to happen is, if you engage the line button, it's actually going to turn into, I think, a 20 dB pad, which is a lot. It could just be 10, but even if it is 20, that's a lot of pad. It's for kick drums, snare drums, maybe a really loud vocalist, just any signal that is just coming in too hot from the mic capsule, and that really helps to pad down the mic input. Okay, right below this gain, you have a high pass. Okay, right below this gain, you have a high pass filter. This is set at 100 hertz, and that's just simply going to help to take care of any low end rumble from like maybe a room mic or a stage mic or just anything that you really don't need that low end coming in. Pretty much anything except for like bass and kick. Um, you can, I mean, even for bass, you can engage the high pass filter if you felt like the kick drum was more prominent in the low end, but you didn't want the bass to have too much mud going on. So, all right, right below here is our multi-band EQ. We have a high frequency set at 12K, and that is pretty standard if you look at Neves or APIs or any other hardware EQ or even software EQ for that matter. Because nowadays the EQ plugins are modeling the hardware, and you're going to see that 12K showing up a lot in a lot of your digital emulations of the hardware. So, and all that's going to do is just a shelf. So if you want to bring up a little bit of air, maybe on your vocal or on the cymbals, without it sounding too harsh, then raising that up a few dB, maybe turn the knob of around like 1 or 2 o'clock, just a little notch, a little bump in high frequency there would help. The next section is your high mids, and this is sweepable all the way from 500 hertz and all the way up to 15K. So this does go higher than the high frequency shelf. And then you can boost that or cut it by 15 dB. Okay, right there. Now the next one is your low mids, and this is going to give you a sweepable range of 35 hertz all the way up to 1K. All right, so that's going to be really helpful. A lot of times, especially with drums, I'm going to focus on drums here mainly because that's the largest instrument that you're ever going to record. Most of the time, that 3 to 500 frequency area can have a lot of mud. It can also sound really boxy. So being able to dial that in and then just cut it just a little bit, maybe a 2 or 3 dB, it's going to make your drums really just cut through a lot more. And then if you go to the high mids and maybe check around maybe like the 1 to 4K range, somewhere in there is going to be like the presence for like your kicks, your snares, the attack of your toms, stuff like that. So you can try and boosting and cutting these ranges, extreme. But most of the time I find that it's better just do little slight amounts of booster cut, just kind of sweeten the overall sound. Okay. Now a really cool feature here is the EQ in. So if you want to A/B your EQ choices, you can make all your adjustments here and then push in the EQ to hear how the EQ actually affects the signal. Then you can take it back out. Okay, so that's really good. Now we have 2 rows of gray aux ends. Then we have 2 rows of blue aux ends or aux ends. Then we have 2 rows of yellow. And you can really use these for anything that you want. I'm going to go out on a limb and say maybe the yellows are better for your effects ends. And then the grays and blues are better for maybe like monitors or headphone mixes or anything like that. Okay. And all right, so let's keep going down the line here. We can make these aux ends right here pre or post. So what that's going to mean for us is if we are in the up position, and this is set to post, then the fader, wherever we have this fader positioned, okay, let's move this back so you can see the fader a little bit more. We dial that there. So wherever this fader position is located, that's going to affect how much signal you're sending to the aux end. Okay, if it's in pre, it doesn't matter where this fader is because only the preamp gain is adjusting the overall gain being sent to the aux end, and then from there you can just turn up the aux end however much you need. Okay, so that's what that is. Same thing goes for your yellow aux ends. You have pre or post, and that's all I'm going to say about the aux ends for now until we start looking at the master section here in the middle. Okay. Let's go to our pan knobs, which are in brown. Okay. So far we have red knobs, blue knobs, green knobs, gray, blue, yellow, and brown. Okay. So obviously panning is going to deal a lot with how your signal is getting out of the main outs, but also how it's being grouped to your buses over here in the master section. Okay. So, but just for, simplicity's sake, obviously if you pan something to the left, you're going to hear it out of the left speaker of your setup. And if you pan it to the right, you're going to hear it out of the right speaker. Okay. We'll deal with more with the panning when we start talking about the master section over here. Okay, right below that is your mute. So this is going to mute your signal going to the groups and also to the yellow main faders over here. Okay, pre-fader level. This is going to give you the option to hear your signal regardless of where this fader is located. Okay. And then we have some smaller LEDs. They're very similar to the master LEDs over here. So we got the master LED right there. But these we give you, they give us 2 green LEDs, a yellow, and a red. So if you're seeing 1 green LED light up, that's more than likely plenty of signal that you need for that channel. If you start seeing 2 green LEDs, you're getting close to that 0 mark, and you're still pretty safe. If you start seeing some yellow on a consistent basis, you're probably, your channel gain is probably a little too hot. And if you start seeing some peaks in the red, then you're definitely pushing the volume way too much. You either need to pad down the input or just turn down your gain on the mic pre. Okay? Now the buttons, we have 3 buttons right below this LED, and this is giving you a left and right assignment. We can call this the assignment buttons. Okay? So pushing the white button down is going to send it to the left and right master outputs. Okay, and this is where the panning comes into play. Okay, now we can do, so if I have something panned to the left, that means it's only going to be sent to group 1. Okay, as long as I have that 1 and 2 button pushed down. Okay, now there's not I guess you could be, but there's not tons of cases to where you would want to send it out 1, 2, and 3 and 4. So if you had it panned to the left, you'd be going out of 1 and 3. If you had it panned to the right, you'd be going out of 2 and 4. But once again, you may want that, you may not. It just kind of depends. But for me, I would either want to send it out either only 1 or 2, and that's pretty much it. Especially if I'm in a recording situation to where I would want maybe like group, maybe tracks 1 through 4 to be sent to group 1, and that could be like some drums or some guitars or I don't know, whatever you want. And then if I took channels 5 through 6 and panned them to the right, then I would send those to groups 2, and this red fader right here will control the next 4 channels. So we'd have group 1 with the 1 through 4, and then group 2 with 5 through 8. And then you could do like 9 through 12 on group 3, and then 13 through 16 on group 4. Okay? And 15 and 16 is understanding that you can either have a mic plugged into this, or you can have 2 separate stereo sources. Okay? So let's check out the comments here. And I don't see anything just yet. So I'm just going to keep going. Okay? And everything looks good on my end. No lagging or anything, so that's good. All right, so let's talk about my use for the studio. Okay, let me flip this around so you can see what I'm dealing with here. So the whole reason why I got this is you can see my PreSonus Studio Live 32R. Now this unit within itself is a rack mixer, and it can do everything standalone. I don't need a separate board to use this mixer to record with. The issue is, the reason why I got the board in the first place is for a recording session, it can move quickly, right? And with the 32R and the universal control surface, there's a little bit of lag time between, like, hey, I need to adjust these faders or maybe adjust someone's headphone mix, and you have to open up UC control or already have it open on another screen if you actually have another screen. And I know there's multiple desktops you can create on a Mac and all that stuff, but it's really just about like a workflow kind of thing. So what I was doing, this is my setup in my own mind. What I was doing was using channels 1 through 8 for my drums, and also 9 through 12 if I had like any extra for maybe like room mics or hi-hat mic or like snare bottom, kick out, stuff like that. Because essentially you would have like kick, snare, overhead left, overhead right, and then tom 1, tom 2, tom 3, and then hi-hat, and then you could have maybe like a drum room left and a drum room right, depending on your room that you're in. And then 11 and 12 could be like bass, and then maybe electric guitar. 13 and 14 could be acoustic guitar, and maybe 14 could be vocal or something like that, right? Now, 15 and 16, this is where it gets a little interesting, because what essentially I would be doing is I would essentially use, what was I doing here? I think I was using groups 1. No, this is what I was doing. I remember now. I remember exactly what it was. So I was using the aux sends from any channel, and it'd probably be helpful if I showed you the back of this thing eventually. But let's keep walking through this mindset. Then I'll show you the back and show you how I get everything hooked up. Okay. So let's go something like that. All right. So I'm using aux sends and the yellow knobs here. I'm going out. I'm taking a cable out of 5, for instance, and I'm plugging that into the input of one of the Studio Live 32R inputs. And what essentially that's doing is I'm now using that as the send to go to its own reverb. Let me pull up a UC control software here so you can see what that looks like. Okay, so this is going to be fun. We're going to kind of move around a little bit. Okay, here we go. So here's our UC control interface, or software controller, and this controls everything about the Presonus Studio Live, which I got after the Allen Heath, and then also the 32R, just whatever you want to do in conjunction with that. So you can see my input, my vocal input right here on 18. So let's imagine that my vocal input was actually an input receiving an aux send from the Allen Heath board. Okay. From there, I could either use any one of these aux mixes or sub mixes or matrix mixes. There are essentially 16 different mixes I can use. So I want to say that, let's just say, for instance, aux 13 was my reverb, right? So I could pull that up, and essentially what would happen is this would be feeding into a reverb. Okay, and actually have effects A, B, C, and D right here. Okay, so this one input, which is really the send from any one of these channels on the board, is now feeding into effects return, or an effect. And then now the output of this, which if I go to, shoot, I just messed up. That's not what I want. I want to be able to go here. Okay, so like effects return A, for instance, I can send this out of an output and then go back into one of these faders. So it's a very long and confusing explanation, but essentially I'm making a loop. Hello. Essentially I'm making a loop here. Let me make sure this is tight. Okay. Might have to hold this. So essentially I'm making a loop from the output of aux send 5 into the input of the 32R, and then the output of that submix that I'm using as my reverb, that's going down either a stereo input right here on the board, or I can have it come back in on just a mono input. Maybe like 13 or 14 could be my effects returns onto the board. So if you're looking at it this way, you can be like, well, why don't you just use, like, you could use 17 through 24 over here as your effects returns if you really wanted to have that many. But for me, I'm only using 2 different effects. Just a reverb, maybe a short reverb and a long reverb, or maybe a delay or something like that. Just any 2 combinations of effects. That's really the best way to do it. Let me tighten this thing up here. Why is this not tightening up? Okay. I'm just going to have to hold it for a little bit. So I hope the explanation of how do I route audio out of the board into something else that then gets me the ability to have some kind of reverb. So essentially I'm using the 32R as a big reverb unit. Okay, now if you have an external like reverb pedal, any stomp box, if you're a guitar player and you have a reverb pedal, or even a Line 6 HX stomp, or a headrush, or any external device that has reverb on it, you could essentially use that as your reverb. You would just take a cable, send out of maybe say like aux 5. That would go into the input of your pedal or your rack device, and then the output of your pedal or rack device is now being plugged back into a return channel right here on your board. Okay, and I am not sure why this is not staying tight. It keeps wanting to move on me here. Let's see. Maybe this is okay. I think that's what it was. My little thing is not staying tight. All right. So that's my explanation on effects and how I would get that set up. Now, one thing that I had to consider when looking at this board was, if I wanted to print the EQ or not while I'm recording. Because essentially, if you turn the EQ knobs here, you're not printing that to the tape or to, or your computer at that point. Because what's happening is you're more than likely using the direct outputs on the back of the board, and your direct outputs are tapped right at the right after the line or the gain knobs, the gain pot. So you're essentially bypassing the EQ, the fader, all that stuff. So that way you're just getting a pure direct signal into your DAW or to your tape. But you're like, hey, I have this cool EQ on the board, why can't I use it? Well, my way around that is you can have some channels that are just sent direct to your computer, right, or your DAW. Essentially, if you want to print your EQ, you can send, let's use 13 and 14 for example. You can do whatever EQ moves you want on there. And then you can send these two separate channels to two separate groups in the master section here. And now essentially what you're doing is you're sending the full EQ, you're sending whatever level your fader is at to the groups, and now the output of these groups are being sent to 4 separate outputs on your recording interface. You can do the same thing with the left and right and the mono. So if you wanted 7 sends going to your DAW that is being fed by all these channels over here, whatever you want. You can have 24 channels of audio, but have 7 inputs going into your DAW, essentially. Especially if you had like an 8-channel interface, but you had 24 channels here. Well, obviously you would have to sum a lot of those channels down to the 7. So maybe like 1 through 12 could be your drums. That could be a stereo bus. And then maybe 3 and 4 can be your guitars. And then 3 could be your bass. Or left can be your bass. Right can be your piano if you wanted to. Then maybe mono could be your vocals. There's, well, maybe not mono. Let's leave mono out because that's really not doing anything. So you're really just worrying about 6 sends going to your DAW. So there's just only so many ways you can do it. But if you really have to have the EQ printed to your DAW or your tape, then that's how you'd have to do it. You have to send it from here directly to a group or your left and right out, and then that goes out to your DAW of choice. Okay? So that's how you do that. All right, before we turn this camera around, let's look at the master section up here. And there's a lot of functionality that you can do here. Like for instance, we have our monitor volume with this red knob right here. And we also have a talkback button, which is really cool. You can connect your microphone right here to this. Let me bring this up over here. Maybe move this over so you can see it a little bit better. Okay, that works. So here's your talkback. Here's your headphones. And I think this is your actual talkback level right here. How much you want of that. Now, actually, hold on. Okay, this is the talkback mic, but this is actually the headphone volume right here. Unless this is the monitor knob. I really can't remember. It doesn't matter at this point. So we do have our talkback button right here. We can send that to the left and right, the groups 1 through 4, aux sends 1 and 2, or aux sends 3 and 4. So depending on your headphone and speaker setup, and this is really different if you're whether you're actually in the studio or maybe doing like a live gig at a church or an outdoor festival or whatever you're doing. But let's say the drums had a personal set of monitors on stage that was going through aux 1 and 2, and you only wanted to talk to him, right? You just go over here, choose aux 1 and 2, push down the talkback button, and be like, hey, drummer, I think your snare is sounding horrible today. You need to tune it. And then you just let go. And he's like, oh, okay, well, the sound engineer is pretty opinionated today. I guess I'm just going to ignore him. So, but that's an option that you can have. Okay, you can send some peak noise through the board, and that's just mainly for testing purposes. If you didn't have any inputs plugged in, you can run some peak noise in and test out your different channels. Okay. Okay, I think this is a good time to go ahead and look at the back of the board. And let me get that set up here. Spin this thing around. And this will be fun. See if I can get this positioned here. Should have had my light on so you can see things a little bit better. Yeah, this is not going to be great, but it is what it is. Maybe, unless I can get my let me get my phone. I use my phone light over here. You can tell I really thought this through. But thanks for hanging with me here, because this is important stuff. Okay. Yeah, something like that. All right. So this section right here is what we're using for. See if I can get this. It's really not a way to make that better. You're just gonna have to look at it from like kind of diagonal like that. So, for instance, we can use the monitor out up here. This is what I connected to my main speakers. Or actually, I connected that to my PreSonus monitor station. And then from there, I connected my speakers. So that way I can have multiple speakers set up. But it's all controlled through this one red knob, the monitor knob up here in the master section. Okay. All right, so right below this is the matrix, and the matrix is kind of cool. So you can use the matrix as another set of outputs, and all that's really doing is combining different combinations of your aux sends, your groups, and no, sorry, not aux sends, but it's doing your left and right, your groups, and you can have an external input. coming in. Alright, so below this is where our aux inputs are right here. You can see that. So this is where I would send out aux in 5 and 6, and that would go to my PreSonus, two inputs on my PreSonus. That's going to be for my effects returns, or effects sends. And then over here, let's do this. You can see that here. So on all these channels, we have direct outputs. Okay? And this is where you're going to connect snake cables, individual cables, whatever you want, whatever line TRS cables you have. That's where you're going to connect those cables to your external device. Okay? Whether if you have 24 channels of inputs, that's great. A guy I know has 24 channel hard disk recorder, which is what he would use this for. And let's go over here a little bit. This might be a decent angle for you. Okay. So we can see we have direct outs on the top, inserts right below that. This is a TRS insert, which means a TRS is going to come out, and you're going to have a dual mono cable that is going to be connected to the ins and out of an external device. And once again, that could be a guitar pedal, that could be a hardware compressor, whatever you want to insert into the signal pad. That's where you would do that. Then you have a line input, which once again, if you have a line input connected, then the pad line button is no longer a pad, but it just switches from XLR to line. So that is another way to kind of have like an inline console, is you could use the same 8 channels with the microphone XLR outputs, or inputs, sorry, with the XLR inputs to record your audio, and then switch over to the line input and then listen back on the same channels. Maybe if you have like an 8-channel tape machine that you want to do that for, that's what you would use that for, is switching from XLR input to line input. Okay. Here on the very bottom, let's see here. Here on the very bottom, we have our XLR outputs. And this is where you can actually switch between your groups and your aux. There's a little button on the top in the master section here that says whatever is being used for these XLRs, you can push a button, and now these are now the aux end outputs. And then the 1/4 inch auxes are now the groups. So you would have to read the manual to determine, what situation you would want to use that in. But for me, I just keep things real simple. I'm only using this for studio stuff, so I don't need, all these XLR outputs to go to like speakers and then have the situation where I would want to switch that over to send it to like headphones or something. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense in that regard. But I am planning on selling this because it's just there's a few issues that I had. And issue number 1 was I want my control room to be as quiet as it can be. And I already have a computer that has some fan noise going on, which is okay to a certain extent. But if I'm sitting here at the computer and I want to record either background vocals or maybe an acoustic guitar, and I'm playing the role of performer and engineer, I don't need a lot of extra noise getting into the microphone. And the issue with the Allen Heath is there is some fan noise. So what I'm going to do, just real fast, let me find a so the power button is right back here. So let's turn this on. And right now it's really hard to tell because there is some fan noise from my computer. Let's turn this off and let's turn it back on, see if we can hear a difference. You can hear that. So that's the actual sound from the board itself, okay? Now, if that's, you really have to hear it in context of your own setup, because to you that sound may not be that bad. But for me, I just really have to have a nice quiet control room. Otherwise, I have to go into the other room and try to do the back and forth thing. It's just not, I just don't like that workflow. But let's say you have this in a big church. Well, a little bit of fan noise way back in the room is not going to interrupt the church service at all, especially if you're out in like a festival, with every all the bands are nice and loud. You're not even going to hear it. But in a very quiet environment like a studio, you're going to hear every pin drop, and that's just it's just not something that I want to deal with. So I did end up getting the PreSonus Studio Live Series 3 mixer. And I've been using that for now. And I'll go over the PreSonus in a different video. But yeah, this is the Allen Heath. It's a great board. It has 24 channels, a very generous master section with a lot of flexibility for routing. I like having the 6 aux sends, the first 4 for maybe headphones, and then the last 2 for some kind of effects, sends and returns. And if you have any questions, once again, just leave a comment down below. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. I know it was kind of sporadic and kind of hectic all over the place with me